Gothen Day in its day from Viking superpowers. Today I'm going to tell you about a Valhalla experience I had when I first started practicing yoga back in the late 90s. I'd gone along to a yoga class under sufferance. I had a friend who was a yoga teacher who was always pestering me to come and do yoga, and I always thought it was sort of a girl's art, and I had all sorts of excuses that I wasn't flexible, etc., etc. But eventually I went along and I was actually surprised how much I enjoyed it. It was very grueling. It wasn't just nice and relaxing. It was very intense. But I managed to get myself along a couple of times, and then this particular class, it was an early morning. We started about 6 in the morning, and most of the people in that class were quite senior in yoga. They'd been doing it many, many years, and I remember that the teacher told me she had 20 plus years experience in yoga. So I was the beginner. We went through all the asana, which is what they call the poses, and you do this thing where you breathe in a certain way, and it quickly gets you into a very deep meditative state, essentially closes the conscious mind down, where you stop thinking, worrying, blah, 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 blah. So at the end of this session, I was in a pretty cool place, very quiet, very peaceful, sort of a bit exhausted, but in a good way. And the teacher said, righto, I'm going to get you to lie down on your mats now. And this is called Shovearssenar. She was sort of mainly telling it to me and a few others who are newish. And as far as I knew, I'd done this before. It was just a bit of a relax. I knew I wasn't supposed to go to sleep, but the point was to really calm your mind even further and just let all the tension out of your body. So I did what she told me. She put a blanket over me, put a folded blanket under my head, kept breathing in the same way I'd been breathing, tried not to think. Pretty soon I was sinking back. She told us to put your consciousness in between your brows and start sinking back towards the back of your head. So I sunk back, and I really started to feel it. Like I could actually feel like I was dropping down some kind of endless black mine shaft. But I wasn't scared. I was just floating and falling back. Suddenly I got a shock because I was in the middle of this roaring fire. Like, I'm talking making steel level fire. It must have been a huge wind, but I was lying on a great pile of logs, and in the middle of this fire I was not feeling anything. And I think I glanced first at my body and I saw that I was burning. And I thought, uh-oh, and I looked to the left, and there was a big man, big muscular guy, really bushy, thick red hair, big red beard, and I knew he was my brother. For some reason, I just knew he was my brother. And he was holding a flaming torch up. He was stark naked, and he was chanting in this language that I didn't understand. And I did know a bit of Icelandic and Norse back then, but I got a feeling it was a Norse type language, but I didn't understand it. And it was, a dark night. I looked around, and behind him there was these massive trees covered in lichen. I remember there were sort of fir type trees. I remember greenish lichen, maybe dark blue, dark green, but it was obviously in the middle of a big forest. And where I'm lying on this fire, there's a clearing, and I hear crying, and I look down towards my feet and I see these, I think 3 or 4 young women, and I remember they were pretty young. They had long straight black hair. Their faces weren't really Asian. They were more, maybe Slavic people, but I knew they were crying for me, and they were just wearing baggy clothes, which later I realised in the Viking Age, if this was happening in the Viking Age, they were sort of slaves' clothes. But I felt like these girls really cared about me and I cared about them. And I realised that I must be dead, and I was lying on this funeral pyre. And I looked at I could see my chest, I could see my ribs like a sort of a barrel like this. I could see all the ribs, but I could see down the barrel of it. And most of me was gone, but there were still sort of muscles and things burning. And I remember the flesh was black and it was bubbling. Sorry for the gruesome detail, but this fire was consuming me and smoke was roaring up, and it was sort of me roaring up with the smoke. And a thought came to me, there's no point staying here, there's nothing here for me. So I somewhat reluctantly left and I went up with the smoke. And this is all just going on. I'm just experiencing this. I'm not aware at all that I'm lying on a yoga mat. I go up with the smoke, and as I climb up higher in the trees, I see this like a little whirlwind come down from these thick grey clouds up above. And I wasn't aware of coldness or anything, or heat when I was on the fire. But I just see it all. And I see this whirlwind come down, and I go into this little tiny whirlwind, and it sucks me up, and we go whoop, up into the clouds, and then everything was black, jet black, and nothing. And something said to me, not really a voice, but I just knew I was forbidden to see what was going on up there. I knew that whoever this was, whether it was me or somebody else who died, was going to a divine place, and I, the guy doing yoga, having this vision, wasn't allowed there. So I just lay there, and everything was quiet. I didn't really come to about the yoga room exactly. I sort of was just in this special space, and then next thing, I'm in the whirlwind again, but this time it's bright sunny day, and I'm zooming through this forest at an incredible rate, zigzagging between trees, like not going through, I'm just zigzagging through the trees. And I do think at the time I thought, is this the next day? Is this weeks, months, years later? Who can tell? How long was I up there in that black place? Anyway, after a little bit of travelling, I came to another clearing, and I remember it was bright and sunny in a sort of a overcasty Scandinavian way. And there was this lot of trees. I guess people had felled the trees, but there was a pile that looked like somebody had made it. And as I came up closely, I saw it was roughly made into a shelter. And there was not only logs about this thick, but there was also grass and moss and dirt and rocks and things. So I saw a crack, and I went through the crack, and inside was a young girl, looked like a teenager, very blonde, not like that red-headed brother of mine, heavily pregnant. I remember her skin was quite olive, sort of tanned olive skin. She was naked, and she had her legs sort of up, and she was obviously about to give birth. And in this whirlwind, I wasn't really directing this, it just happened. The whirlwind took me in, and I went inside her, and I saw the pink walls as I went through. I saw the walls, went, wow. And then I was just there on my right side, a tiny little baby, unborn baby, and I was so full of bliss. I was completely blissed out, and I'm lying there on my right side, and now I sort of imagine I saw an umbilical cord. I don't know if I really did, but I just remember being that baby. And then that was it. I heard the yoga teacher say, okay, everybody, start coming up out of the deep state you're in. Wherever you are, come back. And as I sat up, the yoga teacher came up to me and said, how was that? Did you enjoy the session? And I said, oh, I really enjoyed the session. And this, what's it called? She said, Shovearssenar. I said, yeah, something pretty far out just happened to me. Could I tell you? She says, yeah, go ahead. So I told her the story just as I've told you. And she looked at me in sort of wonder and said, in 20 years plus of yoga teaching and knowing so many people, I've never heard a story like that. I didn't even know that could happen. And I said, yeah, well, I didn't know because I'm a beginner. I did have a near-death experience back in the 1980, which gave me some unusual abilities, you might say, unusual sort of connections. She said, yeah, maybe that's it. But she left a bit bemused, like she actually said she was jealous. She said, why can't I have an experience like that? I don't know. But years later, I mean, I didn't really believe in reincarnation solidly, but probably after that experience I did. I'd had a few strange things happen to me, in the early 90s, really, early 90s. Also in the late 80s, I had a couple of experiences which I'll eventually tell you about that I believe were past life visions. And you probably know this, but the Tibetans fully believe in reincarnation, same as the Indians and Chinese, Japanese people traditionally. And the Dalai Lama says that it's not just Eastern people who can remember past lives. He said some Westerners can do it. And I appear to be one of those people, which sort of surprised me when they started happening. But that experience really, it just came out of the blue. Like, it wasn't like I knew what sort of experience you're supposed to have. I really did think it was just a lie down. So I thought I was just trying not to go to sleep and just relax. But a fair bit later, actually, I found out that Shovearssenar literally means corpse pose. Like shava means a corpse, a dead body, and asana means a pose. And we have all sorts of ones, dog pose and up dog, down dog, salute to the sun, different poses, crocodile poses, all sorts of stuff. This particular one is considered a very advanced pose. It's usually misunderstood to mean a good lie down, and that's how most people practice it, but it actually is a very advanced pose, and it's about meditating on death and rebirth, literally. And there's stories about people in India, yogis, real fanatical ones, who go and live on like a death valley place where they burn bodies and they cover themselves in the ashes of dead people, and they just meditate on death all the time, and they essentially practice this Savasana. And apparently, according to the story, some of them actually did die. Like, they just went so far into it that they didn't come back. And I read about a prohibition from one of the head yogis saying to people, don't go doing that, don't go too far into it. So what's this to do with the Vikings? Well, for me, that was a Viking experience, absolutely. And I've always felt just instinctively that I am a reincarnated Viking. But that pretty much proved it to me. I didn't have a name. I don't know what exact period I was in. It could have been before the Viking Age, could have been the Vendel Age, could have been even further back. Could have even been later than the Viking Age, in the later Middle Ages. But my instinct is that it was pretty much smack bang in the middle of the Viking Age. I believe that I went to Valhalla. Now, before you start saying, well, you didn't die in battle, well, maybe I did. I don't know why I was dead. If he was anything like me, he probably died in battle, because I have a lot of trouble holding back if somebody wants to fight, especially if somebody's attacking or hurting my friends. I pretty much want to fight. And it's pretty easy to die in those days. But the thing about Valhalla is it's a story, and I'm going to make more in-depth videos about Valhalla in the sagas and in the Eddas and the different stories and proofs and what it could be. But my feeling is that Valhalla is a story about exactly this, that we die and we go to a feasting place, a place of great bliss and pleasure, and then we come back and we do it all over again. We drink and we fight and we die. Then we go to Valhalla again. So rather than the classical interpretation is that the Einherjar, the warriors who die in battle rather than a cow's death, they go there and they spend all their time for who knows how long waiting for Ragnarok, getting on the terps, as we say in Australia, getting drunk, making love to beautiful girls, whoever you want, and dying, going out and fighting your mates, killing each other in horrible ways, and then getting stuck back together and then coming back, sort of like an episode of Westworld. It's never really gelled with me. I thought, that doesn't attract me much. I am a warrior, but I don't really want to spend my time fighting. Like, I don't really like it. I hold back as much as I can. Getting drunk's okay, and being with the girls, maybe, head over to Freya's Hall every now and then, the goddess of love. But seriously, I do think this is an ancient knowledge, and I think it's a big part of why the Vikings were so formidable. And I think it's a big part of why the Christian church, the early church, hated them so much and wanted to destroy their religion, because they had suppressed reincarnation, which is another subject to be covered somewhere else. But, many authorities and writers say that the early church did have a belief in reincarnation. But you can imagine warriors who really believe this are not so scared of death. Like, nobody likes really to be, gutted or have your bits chopped off, but everyone, you like to think, well, I've got a chance, it's not the end of me. If it's the end of me, well, you just think, oh, do I want to throw my life away today? So that's what I think. I think Valhalla is the hall of the slain. I think the word Val perhaps means valiant as well. The Einherjar, Odin's boys that he gathers with his Valkyries bring up. And I think that's us. And I think those Valkyries came to get me in the form of that whirlwind. And there's more to Valhalla than it looks. So I won't put any spoilers here, but Odin himself is said to have died in a way that's a little bit unusual, especially according to that whole belief that if you don't die in battle, then you're not going to Valhalla, you're going to hell, H-E-L, or somewhere else. And maybe spend the time gardening and then getting drunk at night and then a bit more gardening. Anyway, I really enjoyed telling this story. I hope it means something to you, and I'll see you next time.